All right, this is Zane in the Hurricane, chapter 20. What shines in the fierce sunlight. We don't exactly know knock on doors because Mr. True is worried about what he calls possible booby traps. So he calls out to each house from the street, "Anybody home? Can we get some help?" It's pretty obvious that Mr. True doesn't feel comfortable in this neighborhood, or for that matter, begging for help from strangers who won't show their faces. He stands in the street, a respectful distance from each house, cupping his hands to his mouth and calling out. When no one responds, we move on, house after house, greeted by silence and sheets of plywood nailed over windows like closed eyelids, blind to everything. Sometimes we hear motors running from behind their houses, generators. That means people, right? But none are willing to show themselves, not to us. It's a lonely feeling, thinking that some of the owners might be in there, hiding behind their plywood. Not that we know for sure, although Bandy barks at certain houses as if he can smell life within. More than once, I see something flitting in the shadows behind the shutters, as if a person moved out from the light, away from our sight. Folks scared, Mr. True mutters under his breath, like he's trying to convince himself. Why else they ignore us? A man and 2 children present no threat to none of them. Some places, if you ignore the torn up shrubbery and scattered around like dirt confetti, and a few trees leaning over to touch the soggy ground, you wouldn't know there'd been a hurricane or a flood. The houses in this part of the city are mostly untouched. Big, sturdy homes built on high ground with maybe some leaves clotted in the intricate trim of the front porch, like spinach stuck in the front teeth. We're most of the way down the block, and the houses keep getting bigger and grander and more closed up with steel hurricane shutters pulled down like shades, when Bandy stops in his tracks and starts growling deep in his throat. What he sense? Mr. True wants to know. A moment later, we hear it too, a low thump of an approaching helicopter. I expect to see a flash of orange and white from the Coast Guard, but that's not what passes overhead, blasting a hot wind from above. This helicopter is smaller, darker, and unmarked. After it slips over the horizon, we hear the engine throttle down, the whine of the planes quickly subsiding. I don't know much about helicopters, but it sure sounds like it landed somewhere in the neighborhood. Might be they coming to save us, Melvina suggests. Might be, says Mr. True doubtfully. Melvina starts to run in the direction of the helicopter, and Mr. True hollers at her to hold up. She turns back, looking hurt at the sound of his raised voice. "Mercy, child," he says much softer. "Can't keep up with you running like that." He's been limping pretty bad since we got out of the canoe, wincing with every step. Whatever he did to his ankle or foot, it appears to have gotten worse. Not that he'll talk about it, except to say that it ain't nothing to worry about. Melvina takes his hand, and for a moment she looks younger than she is. "I'm gonna stay close by you," she promises. He takes a deep breath. We check on this. If nothing come of it, we get back in that canoe, find us a safe place to shelter, dry or not. That's the plan. "That's a good plan, True." He grins and shakes his head. "You got me all confused, darling, being so agreeable." He turns to me. "Zane Dupree, you keep hold of that dog. Some folks around here will shoot a stray dog if they see it off the leash." "Yes, sir." So we keep together, Mr. True limping and not wanting any help, not even a shoulder to lean on. The girl with the wild hair holding his hand, and me and my dog on his leash of borrowed rope. All of us simmering in the unbearable heat, tormented by endless mosquitoes and desperate for a helping hand. Doesn't make sense that no one is willing to help us. Folks were helping survivors get out of Grammy's drowned neighborhood, like me and Bandy got rescued from the attic, okay? Why not here, where the storm barely did any damage? Is there something about the big houses with the fancy trim that makes people hide from those in need? In the distance, we hear a sharp, echoing bang that could have been gunshots. Melvina shrieks against Mr. True, and he groans as the weight comes down on his foot. "Pay no heed," he says, as more gunshots go off like muffled firecrackers. Long way gone. None to do with us." We trudge along, Bandy tugging eagerly and me holding him back, fearful of those gunshots, if they are gunshots. But what else makes that noise? So after they're shooting out in the broad daylight, maybe firing to signal they need help? Best not to dwell on, Mr. True says. Maybe Malvina is right. Maybe the helicopter has come to rescue us. It's not like we need so much: shelter from the sun, water to drink, a phone to call my mom, oh, and a doctor to fix Mr. True's foot. Truth is, right now, I'll settle for a phone. This may sound kind of weak, but I miss my mom something awful. We've gone far enough, he says, heaving a sigh. Time to turn back. Malvina drops his hand and skitters ahead, trying to see around a pile of thick leaves, branches that have been piled in the middle of the street like a green barricade. There it is, she exclaims. Come on, True. Lean on me. We're almost there. I pull down a branch and take a look. At first, I'm not really sure what I'm seeing, because the way the helicopter shines in the fierce sunlight, it might be a giant insect, a glittering dragonfly perched on the garden next to a white 3-story house. A house so big it has tall columns holding up the roof. A mansion, like you see on TV. On one side of the mansion are enormous moss-covered trees untouched by the storm, and on the other side a wide, lush garden that has been flattened either by Katrina or the downdraft from the helicopter itself. The blades of the helicopter are still turning, and the elegant machine whines like a dog begging to be let off its leash. Me and Malvina want to run into the garden, see if they have room on the helicopter, but Mr. True holds us back. And a good thing, too, because a moment later, men swarm from the house. Men in matching green polo shirts and baggy camo pants. Men wearing mirrored sunglasses and carrying shotguns. The guns swing in our direction until all you can see is the black hole at the end of the long barrel. Hands up! Down on your knees! Now! Have you ever tried raising your hands and dropping to your knees at the same time? Not the easiest thing to do in the world, and Mr. True has the most trouble getting down. He's trying to lower himself without hurting his foot when one of the shotgun men plants a shiny black combat boot on his chest and shoves him to the ground. You leave him alone! Screams Malvina, launching herself at the man with the boot. He peeled her off the way you would flick at a bothersome bug and hands her to me. I can feel her heart slamming against her chest in the tightness of her anger. Keep hold of this little hellion, he commands. As a legally contracted security force, we have the right to defend this property from the predation of looters, using whatever force deemed necessary. We can shoot you dead, and that's exactly what's going to happen unless you answer my questions. You, the light-skinned boy, look at me in the eye, son. No hemming and hawing, no lies. Are we clear? You lie, and I'll know. This is my lie detector right here. He smiles an evil kind of smile, touches the end of the shotgun barrel to my chest, and says very softly, Bang, you lied.